Welcome to Darkwake Signal. This story follows a naval dive where nothing failed, yet something essential was quietly taken. If you enjoy naval stories like this, subscribe and leave a like. Signal received. Let's dive in. The support vessel held position 3 nautical miles off the northern coast, engines idling against a flat sea that reflected nothing but gray. Chief Diver Calder Wynn stood on the dive platform, checking the manifold pressures for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The gauges read normal. Everything read normal. He glanced at second-class diver Elias Morcant, who was already suited, helmet resting in the crook of his arm, staring at the water with the kind of stillness that always made Wynn uneasy. "Ready when you are, Chief," Morcant said. Wynn nodded once and turned to the ladder. The briefing had been unremarkable. A section of undersea cable required visual inspection along a designated corridor at 60 meters. No salvage, no construction, no contact. Follow the line, document the condition, return. The kind of dive Wynn had logged 100 times in his career, the kind that bred complacency in younger divers. He did not allow complacency. Dive Supervisor Marcus Keene stood at the console topside, headset already in place. He met Wynn's eyes through the acrylic faceplate as the helmet was secured and gave a single thumb up. Wynn returned it. The comms crackled to life. "Comms check, Wynn. Clear. Comms check, Morcant. Clear. Your go for descent. Weather holding. Current negligible. Stay on the line." Wynn stepped off the platform. The water received him without resistance, the weight of the suit pulling him down through the thermocline in smooth increments. Morcant followed 2 meters behind. The light faded in stages, blue to green to a diffuse charcoal that swallowed the surface within seconds. Wynn's breathing filled his helmet, steady and mechanical. He adjusted his buoyancy at 15 meters and continued. The seabed appeared as a gradual darkening below, then as texture, then as topography. Wynn's fins stirred fine sediment that hung in the water like smoke. The cable emerged from the gloom as a straight geometry cutting through irregular stone and kelp. He touched down beside it, checked his depth gauge, 61 meters, and looked back. Morcant descended smoothly, his movements economical, almost lazy. He touched down without stirring the sediment. "On the bottom," Wynn reported. "Cable located. Beginning inspection." "Copy. Proceed." They moved along the corridor in tandem, Wynn slightly ahead, both following the cable as it traced the contour of the sea floor. Visibility extended roughly 10 meters in the weak ambient light that filtered from above. Wynn swept his lamp across the cable housing at regular intervals, noting minor incrustations, a few stress points where the casing showed wear. Nothing outside expected parameters. Morcant moved beside him without speaking, his lamp beam occasionally crossing Wynn's as they documented the same sections. The current was minimal. Wynn felt it as a faint pressure against his left side, steady and predictable. He checked his compass bearing, confirmed their heading, and continued. At 12 minutes into the inspection, they reached a section where the cable dipped into a shallow trench filled with darker sediment. Wynn paused, moved his lamp along the length of the trench, and noted the absence of any structural concern. He turned to signal Morcant to continue. Morcant was not moving. "Morcant, status." The younger diver stood motionless, lamp pointed down into the trench, his body angled slightly forward. Wynn moved closer, repeating the call. "Morcant." "Here, Chief." The voice came through flat, but not strained. "Just checking the housing. It's clear. Keep moving." Morcant turned his head slowly, the helmet swiveling to face Wynn, and after a pause that lasted 2 seconds longer than it should have, he nodded. They resumed the inspection. At 18 minutes, the trench ended and the cable rose back to level ground. Wynne checked the next waypoint on his slate and noted the time. They were ahead of schedule. The dive profile allowed another 20 minutes at depth before requiring ascent. He scanned the area ahead, saw only the unbroken continuation of cable and seabed, and moved forward. Behind him, Morcant stopped again. Wynne turned immediately. Morcant. Something's off. Specify. The current. Morcant's lamp swung in a slow arc, illuminating nothing but water and suspended particles. It's not holding. Wynne checked his own position. The faint lateral pressure he'd felt since reaching the bottom remained constant. He extended his arm, watched the fabric of his suit respond to the flow. No change. Current is stable. What are you reading? Not reading. Feeling. Morcant's voice carried no urgency, only a quiet insistence. It's pulling. Pulling where? Morcant pointed into the darkness beyond the cable, perpendicular to their planned route. Wynne moved back to Morcant's position and held still, waiting for any shift in pressure, any change in the water's behavior. He felt nothing. The current remained exactly as it had been. Negligible, predictable, and aligned with the weather topside. I'm not getting it, Wynne said. You're reading normal? Everything's normal. Morcant's helmet turned again toward the open water. Except it's there. Keen's voice broke into the channel. Divers, report. Wynne, proceeding as planned. Morcant's reporting a current variance. I'm not confirming. A pause. Morcant, you need to surface? Negative. I'm good. Stay with the chief. Don't wander. Copy. Wynne gestured toward the cable. Morcant hesitated, then followed. They resumed the inspection, but Wynne now watched Morcant as much as he watched the seabed. The younger diver's movements had changed. Not erratic, but distracted. His lamp kept drifting off the cable, sweeping into the open water as if tracking something just out of range. At 23 minutes, Morcant stopped again. This time, he did not wait for Wynne's acknowledgement. He turned 90 degrees to the left and began moving away from the cable. Morcant, hold. Morcant did not stop. His fins kicked in slow, deliberate strokes, propelling him into the darkness beyond the inspection corridor. Wynne followed immediately, his own fins driving harder to close the gap. Morcant, return to the cable. It's stronger here. What's stronger? The pull. Wynne reached Morcant and gripped his shoulder, pulling him to a stop. Through the faceplate, Morcant's eyes were calm, focused on something Wynne could not see. His breathing remained steady. No signs of nitrogen narcosis, no panic, no confusion. Just certainty. Chief, there's something here. There's nothing here. We return to the cable now. It's not a current, Morcant said quietly. It's a path. Wynne tightened his grip. We don't have a path. We have a route. You're following me back. For a long moment, Morcant did not move. Then slowly, he nodded. Wynne released him and turned back toward the cable, checking his compass to reorient. The line was visible in the distance, a faint geometric certainty against the shapeless dark. He started toward it, and Morcant followed. They reached the cable without further deviation. Wynne resumed the inspection, forcing his attention back to the task, but his awareness remained split. Morcant moved beside him in silence, his lamp now fixed rigidly on the cable housing, no longer drifting. The current pressed lightly against Wynn's suit, unchanged. At 31 minutes, Wynn called the ascent. "Topside, Wynn. Inspection complete. Beginning ascent." "Copy. How's Morcant?" Wynn glanced at the younger diver, who was already adjusting his buoyancy for the climb. "Functional." They rose together, the seabed fading below them as the water lightened by degrees. Wynn maintained visual contact with Morcant throughout the ascent, watching for any sign of difficulty. Morcant's movements were precise, his stops at each decompression interval exact. Whatever had drawn his attention below, he gave no indication of it now. The surface broke above them in a wash of gray light. Wynn felt the swell lift him as he cleared the waterline, and hands reached down to guide him onto the platform. His helmet came off in a hiss of equalized pressure. Morcant surfaced seconds later, his face blank, his breathing normal. Keane was waiting. "Walk me through it." Wynn stripped off his gloves and reached for the slate. "Cable condition is within acceptable parameters. Minor incrustations at 3 points, stress visible on 2 casings, no compromise detected. Morcant reported a current anomaly I couldn't confirm." Keane turned to Morcant. "What did you feel?" Morcant pulled his helmet off and set it down carefully. "Directional pressure, not standard current." "Did it interfere with the inspection?" "No." "Medical check?" Morcant nodded. "I'm good." Keane studied him for a moment, then looked back at Wynn. "You confirm he was stable?" "He followed orders, eventually." "Eventually?" "He wandered off the line. I brought him back." Keane's expression tightened. "How far?" 20 meters. No compromise to safety." Morcant said nothing. Keane sighed and waved them both toward the decompression station. "Get checked. We'll debrief in 30. Wynn followed Morcant into the pressurized chamber and sat on the opposite bench. The doors sealed behind them with a dull thud, and the hiss of regulated air filled the silence. Morcant leaned back against the bulkhead, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm too slow for someone who'd just completed a working dive. "What did you feel down there?" Wynn asked. Morcant opened his eyes. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try." "It wasn't a current. It was a direction." "Meaning?" "The water was showing me where to go." Wynn let the words sit. He did not respond immediately, weighing the statement against what he knew of Morcant's record. The younger diver had logged over 200 dives, most of them in difficult conditions. He was not prone to exaggeration, did not chase stories, did not invent drama. If he said he felt something, he believed it. "Showing you," Wynn said finally. "Like it had intent. Like it had structure. Water doesn't have structure." This did. Wynn studied Morcant's face. The younger man's eyes were clear, his expression composed. There was no trace of irrationality, no defensiveness, just a quiet insistence on what he had experienced. "And you followed it." "I tried." "Why?" Morcant hesitated. "Because it felt right." The decompression cycle completed. The door opened, and they stepped out into the narrow corridor leading to the medical bay. Dr. Henry Ashcroft was waiting, clipboard in hand, his expression professionally neutral. He gestured them both inside. The examination was thorough. Ashcroft checked vitals, ran neurological assessments, drew blood for later analysis. He asked standard questions about dizziness, nausea, disorientation. Wynn answered each one mechanically, his responses clipped and factual. Morcant answered the same questions with the same results. Everything came back normal. "Any headaches?" Ashcroft asked. "No," Morcant said. "Tingling in the extremities?" "No." "Auditory disturbances?" Morcant paused. "No." Ashcroft made a note. "You hesitated." "I didn't hear anything." "But you felt something." "Yes." "Describe it." Morcant glanced at Wynne, then back at Ashcroft. "Directional pull. Like the water had a slope I couldn't see. And Chief Wynne didn't feel it." "No." Ashcroft tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Could be a mild vestibular imbalance. Inner ear pressure differential, not uncommon at depth, usually resolves on its own. I'll schedule a follow-up in 72 hours. If you experience any vertigo, nausea, or disorientation before then, you report immediately." "Understood." Ashcroft turned to Wynne. "You're clear. Both of you are cleared for duty. But Morcant's grounded from diving until the follow-up." Wynne nodded. Morcant said nothing. The debriefing took place in the operations room, a cramped compartment dominated by a single table and a wall-mounted chart of the dive site. Keene sat at the head, Wynne and Morcant across from him. The recording light on the console blinked red. "For the record," Keene began, "Chief Diver Wynne and Second-Class Diver Morcant completed cable inspection dive at 61 meters, duration 43 minutes, including decompression stops. Inspection objectives achieved. No equipment failure, no safety incidents." He paused. "Morcant, explain the deviation." "I felt a directional current that wasn't registering on instruments. I moved toward it to investigate." "Without authorization?" "Yes." "Why?" "It felt operationally relevant." Keene leaned forward. "How does a feeling constitute operational relevance?" Morcant met his eyes. "Because it was consistent. It didn't fluctuate. It had structure. Water doesn't have structure. This did." Keene looked at Wynne. "Your assessment?" "He deviated from protocol. I corrected it. The dive was completed without compromise." "Did you feel what he felt?" "No." "Do you believe he felt it?" Wynne considered the question. "I believe he experienced something." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Keene exhaled slowly and made a note in the logbook. "Morcant, you're grounded pending medical clearance. Wynne, you're primary for any follow-up inspections. We'll revisit this if the doctor finds anything." He closed the logbook. "Dismissed." They left the operations room in silence. Morcant turned toward the berthing compartment without a word. Wynne watched him go, then headed topside. The deck was empty. The sun had set behind a bank of low clouds, leaving the ocean the color of slag. Wynne stood at the rail and looked down at the water. It moved in long, slow swells, each one identical to the last. No variance, no structure, just water, doing what water did. He thought about Morcant's face in the decompression chamber, the certainty in his voice, the calm. Wynne had been diving for 18 years. He knew the ocean in all its conditions, knew the way pressure and cold and darkness could distort perception, could trick the mind into seeing patterns where none existed. He had seen divers panic over shadows, freeze at thermoclines, convince themselves they were ascending when they were sinking. The ocean was full of illusions. But Morcant had not panicked. He had not frozen. He had moved with purpose, following something only he could perceive. Wynne turned away from the rail and went below. The follow-up examination took place 72 hours later in the same medical bay. Ashcroft ran the same tests, asked the same questions, recorded the same results. Morcant's vitals were normal. His neurological function was normal. His blood work showed no abnormalities. The inner ear examination revealed no pressure differential, no fluid imbalance, no physiological explanation for what he had reported. "How do you feel?" Ashcroft asked. "Fine." "Any recurrence of the directional sensation?" "No." "Dizziness?" "No." "Disorientation?" "No." Ashcroft made a final note and set the clipboard aside. "You're cleared for duty. Diving status reinstated." Morcant nodded and stood to leave. "One more thing," Ashcroft said. "If you experience anything similar on your next dive, you surface immediately. Understood?" "Understood." Morcant left the medical bay and found Wynne waiting in the corridor. "Cleared?" Wynne asked. "Cleared." "Good. We have another inspection scheduled for tomorrow. Same site." Morcant's expression did not change. "Same site." "Problem?" "No problem." Wynne studied him for a moment. "If you feel anything off down there, you report it. You don't investigate. You report." "Copy." They descended the next morning under the same gray sky, the same flat sea. Wynne led, Morcant followed, and the seabed rose to meet them in the same gradual darkening. The cable appeared exactly where it had been before, unaltered, undisturbed. They moved along the corridor in tandem, their lamps sweeping across familiar topography. At 11 minutes, they reached the trench. Morcant stopped. Wynne turned immediately. "Morcant." "It's here." "What's here?" "The pull." Wynne moved to Morcant's position and held still. The current pressed against his suit with the same faint, predictable pressure. Nothing had changed. "I'm not reading it," Wynne said. "It's not something you read." "Then what is it?" Morcant turned his lamp toward the open water. "It's a path. And it's consistent." Wynne felt a cold thread of unease work through his chest. "You're not following it." "I'm not." "Good." They resumed the inspection. Morcant stayed close to the cable, his movements precise, his focus locked on the task. But Wynne could see the tension in his posture, the way his helmet kept angling toward the darkness beyond their route. Whatever he was feeling, it had not diminished. It had returned, exact and unchanged. At 27 minutes, Wynne called the ascent. They surfaced without incident. The debriefing was brief. Morcant reported the sensation again. Ashcroft ran another examination. The results were identical. The third dive followed the same pattern, and the fourth. Each time, Morcant felt the pull at the same location, described it in the same terms, and resisted the urge to follow. Each time, Wynne felt nothing. The medical examinations continued to show no abnormalities. On the fifth dive, Morcant did not stop at the trench. He moved past it without comment, completed the inspection, and ascended on schedule. When Ashcroft asked if he had felt the pull, Morcant said no. Wynne did not believe him. A week later, Morcant requested a transfer to surface operations. Keene approved it without question. The transfer was logged as voluntary, routine, unremarkable. Morcant left the dive team and took a position managing equipment inventory topside. Wynne saw him occasionally in the corridors or on deck, always alone, always moving with the same quiet purpose. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. 2 months after the transfer, Wynne was assigned a new partner for a deep inspection dive at 80 meters. The dive proceeded without incident. At 40 minutes, Wynne checked his compass and noted a slight deviation in the current. He corrected his heading and continued. The sensation lasted less than 10 seconds. But in those 10 seconds, Wynne felt it. Not a current, not a pressure, a direction. Faint, but unmistakable. The water seemed to open in a way that had nothing to do with flow or temperature or visibility. It simply suggested a path, one that existed only in relation to his movement, his presence. He stopped. He checked his instruments. Everything read normal. He turned away from the pull and continued the inspection. Topside, he said nothing. He completed the post-dive examination, filed his report, and returned to his quarters. That night, he lay in his bunk and stared at the bulkhead, replaying the sensation in his mind. He had felt what Morcant described, brief but undeniable. He did not report it. The next dive came 3 days later. Wynne descended with the same partner to the same depth. At 52 minutes, the pull returned. This time it was stronger, more defined, as if the water had learned the shape of his movement and adjusted accordingly. Wynne ignored it, finished the dive, and surfaced. He saw Morcant on deck that evening, standing at the rail, staring at the water. Wynne approached slowly, stopping a few meters away. "You feel it now," Morcant said without turning. Wynne did not answer immediately. "Yes." "Does it bother you?" "I don't know yet." Morcant turned to face him. "It won't stop. Once it finds you, it doesn't stop." "What is it?" "I don't know. But it's not random." Wynne looked down at the water. The swells moved in the same slow rhythm, unchanged, indifferent. "You followed it once, in your head. Where did it lead?" "Nowhere I could reach." "Meaning?" "It wasn't a place. It was a choice." "Between what?" Morcant's expression remained calm, but his eyes carried something Wynne had not seen before: resignation. "Between staying what you are and becoming what you're not." Wynne let the words settle. "And you chose to stay." "I chose to stop diving." "That's not the same thing." "It's close enough." Morcant turned back to the water. Wynne stood beside him in silence, both of them watching the ocean move in its endless, unbroken repetition. "You'll lose it eventually," Morcant said. "The sense of where you are underwater. It doesn't happen all at once. Just slowly. One dive at a time." "How do you know?" "Because I already did." Wynne looked at him. "Medical didn't find anything." "They wouldn't. It's not something you lose. It's something that gets taken." "By what?" Morcant shook his head. "I don't know. But it's awake, and it's paying attention." He walked away, leaving Wynne alone at the rail. Wynne stayed there until the light faded completely, until the ocean became a single, unbroken darkness, watching the water move, feeling nothing. 3 weeks later, Wynne descended to 70 meters for a routine structural inspection. At 38 minutes, he checked his compass and found the needle rotating slowly, unable to settle. He tapped the casing. The needle spun faster. He checked his backup compass. It showed a different heading entirely. He stopped moving and held still, trying to orient himself by memory, by the angle of the light, by the texture of the seabed. But the reference points that had always guided him, subtle, instinctive, automatic, were absent. He knew where the cable should be. He could not feel which direction to move. The pull was gone, and with it, his certainty. He surfaced early, citing equipment malfunction. Ashcroft ran a full neurological workup and found nothing. The compasses were tested and functioned normally. Wynne was cleared for diving. He did not dive again. The transfer request went through without resistance. Wynne moved to a training position on the surface, overseeing new divers, teaching protocols he no longer trusted. He did his job with precision, but he no longer went below. Morcant left the service 6 months later, his discharge quiet and unremarkable. Wynne did not attend the departure ceremony. He heard later that Morcant had moved inland, away from the coast, away from the water. Wynne stayed. He taught. He observed. He stood on deck in the evenings and looked down at the ocean, which moved as it always had, as it always would, indifferent to what it took and what it left behind. Once, during a late inspection briefing, a young diver asked him why he no longer dove. Wynne considered the question, the faces of the divers around the table, the weight of an answer that could not be explained in terms they would accept. "I lost my bearings," he said finally. The diver nodded, assuming equipment failure, assuming correction, assuming return. Wynne did not correct the assumption. He knew what he had lost, and he knew it would not be given back. The training schedule ran in 8-week cycles, each cohort rotating through the same progression of skills Wynne had once mastered without conscious thought. He stood on the platform and watched the new divers descend, their movements cautious and deliberate, their bodies fighting the water instead of moving with it. He radioed corrections, monitored their depth, tracked their time. He did not join them. In the evenings, after the day's exercises concluded, he reviewed their performance logs and noted deficiencies with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything now. The reports were thorough, accurate, and empty of the intuition that had once made him exceptional. He knew this. He did not acknowledge it. Morcant's absence became a fact, unremarked and unexamined. The younger divers did not know him, had never worked with him, did not ask about the gaps in the duty roster from 2 years prior. Wynne did not offer explanations. The ocean had taken something from both of them, but only Morcant had chosen to sever the connection entirely. Wynne remained, teaching others to enter the water he could no longer trust himself to navigate. The feeling had not returned. The pull, the directional certainty Morcant had described and Wynne had briefly experienced, remained absent. In its place was a hollowness that expanded with each dive he observed but did not join. He told himself it was caution. He told himself it was professionalism. He did not tell himself the truth. On a cold morning in late October, Keene called him to the operations room. Wynne entered to find the supervisor standing beside the chart table, 2 dive slates laid out in front of him. Keene looked up, his expression unreadable. "I need you for a recovery operation," Keene said. Wynne kept his face neutral. "I'm assigned to training. I know, this is priority. Equipment went down during yesterday's inspection dive. We need it retrieved before the weather turns. Send Garris. He's cleared for deep work." Garris is in medical. Fractured wrist during a surface drill. Keene tapped the slate. "You're the most experienced diver we have available." Wynne looked down at the chart. The recovery site was marked at 73 meters, slightly east of the cable corridor where Morcant had first felt the pull. The proximity was not coincidental. Nothing about this felt coincidental. "What's the equipment?" Wynne asked. "Survey module. Detached from its mount and settled in a depression. We need it back intact." "How long has it been down?" 18 hours. Wynne studied the chart, calculating the dive profile, the working time at depth, the decompression required. It was within his capability. It had always been within his capability. That was not the issue. "You're hesitating," Keene said. I'm reviewing. You've reviewed. What's the problem? Wynne met Keen's eyes. No problem. Then, your go for tomorrow morning, 0600. Wynne nodded once and left the operations room. He walked the length of the ship twice, his mind running through the dive sequence, the procedures, the contingencies. Everything was familiar. Everything was rote. And beneath it all, the knowledge that he would descend into water that no longer made sense to him, that had stripped away the instinct he had relied on for nearly 2 decades. He found himself at the rail as the sun dropped toward the horizon. The ocean stretched flat and featureless, the same gray it had been the day Morkant first reported the pull. Wynne watched the surface and felt nothing. No anticipation, no dread, just the absence of certainty. A voice broke his focus. "Chief?" Wynne turned. Dr. Ashcroft stood a few meters away, hands in his pockets, his expression professionally mild. "Doctor, heard you're diving tomorrow." "That's correct." Ashcroft moved to the rail beside him. "First time in a while." "Yes." "Any concerns?" "No." Ashcroft nodded slowly, his gaze on the water. "Morkant came to see me before he transferred out. Did you know that?" Wynne said nothing. He wanted to talk about what he'd experienced. Not the pull, not the sensation during the dives. What came after? Ashcroft paused. He said he couldn't orient himself underwater anymore. Not physically disoriented. He knew up from down, knew his depth, knew his position. But he'd lost the sense of where he was supposed to be. Like the water had stopped communicating with him. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it sounded psychological. Stress response. Burnout. I recommended he take leave. See a specialist." Ashcroft turned to face Wynne. "He didn't go. He transferred instead." "His choice? Was it?" Ashcroft's tone remained even, but his eyes were sharp. "Or was it the only option he felt he had left?" Wynne looked back at the water. "What's your point, Doctor?" "My point is that I've seen the same pattern in you. Not as pronounced, not as sudden, but present. You stopped diving. You stopped going below. And every time someone asks you why, you give a different answer that means nothing." "I'm diving tomorrow." "I know. That's what concerns me." Wynne turned fully to face him. "If you have a medical reason to ground me, say it now." "I don't. Your physiology is perfect. Your test results are flawless. You're cleared for any depth, any duration." Ashcroft held his gaze. "But I don't think this is about physiology." "Then it's not your concern." "It's entirely my concern. If you go down tomorrow and something happens, something you can't explain in a report, something that doesn't show up in a blood panel, I'm the one who has to account for it." Ashcroft's voice remained calm, but there was an edge beneath it now. Morkant felt something he couldn't explain, and it cost him his ability to dive. You felt it too. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Wynne was silent for a long moment. The ocean moved below them, indifferent and continuous. "What do you want me to say?" Wynne asked finally. "I want you to tell me what happened down there. You've read the reports?" "I've read what you were willing to write. I'm asking what you didn't." Wynne exhaled slowly. "I lost my bearings. Not my compass, not my depth gauge. My sense of where I was in relation to the water. It didn't come back." "And you think tomorrow will be different?" "No." "Then why are you diving?" Because it's my job. Ashcroft studied him for a moment, then shook his head. That's not good enough. It's the only answer I have. Then I can't stop you. But if you feel anything unusual tomorrow, anything at all, you surface immediately. That's not a suggestion. Understood. Ashcroft turned and walked away. Wynne stayed at the rail until full dark, watching the ocean become a single black expanse, unmarked and unknowable. The dive began at 0600 under a sky the color of wet concrete. Wynne suited up in silence, checked his equipment with the same methodical precision he had maintained for 18 years, and stepped onto the platform. Keene stood at the console topside, headset in place. Comms check, Wynne. Clear. Weather's holding, current minimal. Target depth 73 meters. Recovery zone marked on your slate. Your go for descent. Wynne stepped off the platform. The water received him the same way it always had. The weight pulling him down through familiar layers of light and temperature. He descended slowly, adjusting his buoyancy at intervals, watching the gray-green water darken around him. At 30 meters, he paused and checked his compass. The needle held steady. He continued. The seabed appeared as a gradual solidification of the darkness below, texture emerging from void. Wynne touched down at 73 meters and oriented himself by the markers on his slate. The recovery zone lay 15 meters to the east. He checked his heading and began moving. The survey module appeared after 8 meters, half buried in sediment at the edge of a shallow depression. Wynne approached carefully, sweeping his lamp across the device to assess its condition. The casing was intact, the mounting bracket sheared cleanly. He knelt beside it and began clearing the sediment. The work was simple, mechanical. He scooped away the loose material with steady motions, exposing the base of the module inch by inch. His breathing filled the helmet in regular cycles. The current pressed lightly against his left side, unchanged. At 6 minutes into the recovery, Wynne stopped. The pull had returned. It came not as a sensation, but as a knowledge, immediate and certain. The water ahead of him, beyond the module, beyond the depression, beyond the range of his lamp, held a direction that had nothing to do with current or depth or navigation. It was simply there, patient and consistent, waiting. Wynne remained motionless, his hands still gripping the module. He checked his instruments. Everything read normal. He checked his compass. The needle pointed north, unwavering. The pull was not a physical force. It was an alignment, a suggestion of movement that existed only in relation to his presence. Wynne. Status. Keene's voice cut through the silence. Wynne forced himself to respond. Proceeding. Module located. Beginning extraction. Copy. Time check. You're at 7 minutes. Wynne returned his attention to the module. He cleared the remaining sediment and tested the weight. Manageable. He secured the lifting rig and began the ascent procedure. His movements automatic, his mind split between the task and the pull that had not diminished. At 9 minutes, he lifted the module free. The pull intensified. It did not become stronger in the way a current increases. It became more defined, more precise, as if his movement through the water had clarified its structure. Wynne held the module steady and checked his bearings. The direction was perpendicular to his planned ascent route, leading away from the recovery zone into open water. He did not follow it. He adjusted his buoyancy and began ascending, the module suspended below him on the rig. The water lightened in stages, the pressure easing incrementally as he rose. At 40 meters, he stopped for the first decompression interval. The pull remained, unchanged in intensity, unchanging in direction. Wynne forced his breathing to remain steady. He counted the seconds, watching his depth gauge, waiting for the interval to complete. The pull did not waver. It simply existed, a constant presence that his body wanted to follow and his mind refused to acknowledge. At 18 meters, during the second decompression stop, Wynne felt the pull shift. Not in direction, in character. It was no longer a suggestion. It was a question. The sensation came without words, without images, without any cognitive framework he could articulate. But the meaning was unmistakable. The water was asking if he belonged. Wynne's breathing quickened. He forced it back under control, counting each inhalation, each exhalation, anchoring himself in the rhythm. The question persisted, not insistent, not aggressive, simply present, waiting for an answer he could not give. At 9 meters, the final decompression interval, the pull changed again. It withdrew, not gradually, instantly. The directional certainty that had accompanied him since the seabed vanished as if it had never existed. Wynne felt the absence like a physical void, a sudden lack of reference that left him disoriented despite the clarity of his instruments. He checked his compass. North. He checked his depth. 9 meters. He checked his ascent rate. 0. Everything was correct. Everything was exact. And he could not feel which way to move. Wynne, you're clear to surface. Keen's voice pulled him back. Wynne adjusted his buoyancy and rose the final meters, breaking through the surface into gray morning light. Hands reached down to guide him onto the platform. His helmet came off. The air tasted flat and foreign. Keen was waiting. Module secure? Wynne nodded, unable to speak immediately. He stripped off his gloves, his hands trembling slightly, and forced himself to breathe normally. You good? Keen asked. Fine. Medical check. Now. Wynne followed Keen below to the medical bay. Ashcroft was already there, clipboard ready. The examination proceeded without variation. Vitals, neurological assessment, standard questions. Wynne answered mechanically, his mind still processing what had happened at 9 meters, the moment when the ocean had stopped asking and simply withdrawn. Any disorientation? Ashcroft asked. No. Unusual sensations? Wynne hesitated. Ashcroft caught it immediately. Define unusual. Wynne met his eyes. Directional pull, same as before. When? During the recovery. It stopped during ascent. Ashcroft made a note, his expression neutral. Did it interfere with the operation? No. Do you feel it now? No. Any residual dizziness, nausea, confusion? No. Ashcroft set the clipboard aside. You're cleared. But that's your last dive until we understand what's happening. There's nothing to understand. It's a perceptual anomaly. That's occurred twice now, in the same location, under similar conditions. Ashcroft leaned forward. That's not an anomaly. That's a pattern. Wynne said nothing. You're grounded, Ashcroft continued. Not as punishment, as protocol, until we can determine whether this is physiological, psychological, or environmental. You don't dive. Understood. Wynne left the medical bay and returned to his quarters. He sat on his bunk and stared at the bulkhead, replaying the dive in his mind. The pull had been real. The question had been real. And the withdrawal, the sudden absence of any directional certainty, had been the most real thing of all. The ocean had asked if he belonged, and when he did not answer, it had taken back what it had given. He thought of Morkant, standing at the rail 2 years ago, saying the same thing in different words. It's something that gets taken. Wynne had not believed him then. He believed him now. 3 days later, Wynne requested a transfer. Keene approved it without comment. The paperwork processed quickly, and within 2 weeks, Wynne was reassigned to a desk position at the naval base in San Diego, far from open water, far from diving operations. He did not return to the ocean. The transfer was logged as routine. No one questioned it. No one remarked on the timing. Wynne became another name in another office, processing reports and managing schedules for operations he no longer participated in. At night, lying in a bed that did not move with the swells, he sometimes felt the pull return. Not physically, not as a sensation in water, but as a memory of certainty, a ghost of the alignment he had briefly known and then lost. It came without warning and left without resolution, a reminder that the ocean had spoken to him once and found him wanting. He did not know what the ocean had asked. He knew only that he had failed to answer, and that the cost of that silence was everything he had been. The base in San Diego operated with the kind of regulated efficiency that left no room for ambiguity. Wynne's days became a sequence of documented actions, reports filed, schedules approved, personnel allocations reviewed. The work required attention, but not intuition, precision, but not instinct. He performed it without error and without satisfaction. The ocean was visible from the western edge of the base, a thin line of blue beyond the chain-link fencing and administrative buildings. Wynne did not walk in that direction. He kept to the interior corridors, the briefing rooms, the climate-controlled offices where the only water came from dispensers and the only depth was measured in paperwork. Other personnel occasionally asked about his diving background. The questions were professional, curious, never probing. Wynne answered with the same abbreviated history, 18 years of service, multiple certifications, routine transfer. No one pressed for details. No one asked why a chief diver with his record had moved to a position that kept him permanently ashore. He did not mention Morkant. He did not mention the pull. He did not mention the question the ocean had asked or the certainty it had withdrawn. Those experiences existed in a category beyond official record, beyond medical documentation, beyond any framework the Navy recognized. They were real, but they were not admissible. So he carried them in silence. Months passed. The rhythm of desk work became automatic. Wynne developed a reputation for thoroughness, for catching errors other officers missed, for maintaining standards without visible effort. He was reliable. He was competent. He was absent from himself in ways no evaluation could measure. In March, a personnel file crossed his desk during a routine audit. Second-class diver, Elias Morkant, discharged 8 months prior, status honorable, civilian occupation, unlisted. The file contained nothing unusual. Medical clearances, training certifications, duty logs. Wynne read through it twice, searching for any indication of what Morkant had experienced, any footnote or annotation that acknowledged the gap between official record and lived truth. There was nothing. The file documented a diver who had performed his duties without incident and left the service by choice. It did not mention the pull. It did not mention the loss of directional sense. It did not mention standing at the rail and admitting he could no longer navigate the water that had once been his element. Wynne closed the file and returned it to the archive. He did not look for Morkant's contact information. He did not reach out. There was nothing to say that had not already been communicated in their last conversation. The acknowledgement of something taken, something that would not be restored. That evening, Wynn drove to the coast. He had avoided it since arriving in San Diego, had kept his movements confined to routes that did not intersect with the shoreline. But the file had triggered something, a need to confirm what he already knew. He parked at a public access point and walked to the beach. The sun was setting, throwing orange light across the water. People moved along the sand, joggers, couples, families with children who ran toward the surf and back again, testing the boundary between land and sea. Wynn stood at the waterline and watched the waves break. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and indifferent, moving according to forces that had nothing to do with human presence or human absence. He had spent 18 years learning its patterns, mastering its dangers, becoming fluent in its language. And in the span of 3 dives, it had rendered all of that knowledge irrelevant. He removed his shoes and waded into the shallows. The water was cold, pushing against his legs with a pressure that felt familiar and foreign at once. He closed his eyes and tried to find the sense of orientation that had once been automatic, the awareness of current, the feel of depth, the intuitive knowledge of where he was in relation to the whole. Nothing came. The water moved around him without pattern, without structure, without the subtle communication he had relied on. It was simply water, displaced by his presence, flowing according to physics he could describe but no longer feel. He opened his eyes and looked down. His feet were pale beneath the surface, distorted by refraction. The sand shifted under each wave, revealing small shells, fragments of stone, pieces of things that had been broken and smoothed by time. He watched them appear and vanish, and felt nothing. A voice called out behind him. "You good?" Wynn turned. A lifeguard stood at the edge of the water, radio in hand, watching him with professional concern. "I'm fine," Wynn said. "Water's cold this time of year. Just checking." "I'm fine." The lifeguard nodded and moved on. Wynn waded back to shore, retrieved his shoes, and returned to his car. He sat in the driver's seat and stared at the ocean through the windshield until the light faded completely. He did not return to the coast again. Work continued. Spring turned to summer. The base operated without disruption, and Wynn maintained his position within it. A functionary performing functions, present but not engaged. He attended required briefings, filed required reports, and spoke when spoken to. The other officers treated him with the distant professionalism reserved for competent colleagues who remained fundamentally unknowable. In late July, Wynn received an email from Keene. The subject line read, "Personnel update." The body was brief. "Wynn, thought you should know. Medical retired Lieutenant Marcus Keene effective. 15 July. Cardiac event during routine physical. Prognosis stable but disqualifying for active duty. Replacement TBD. Secondary note. Received inquiry from former SCD Morcant. Reads a dive incident reports from 2 years prior. Referred him to personnel archives. Contact info below if you want to reach out. Keene. Below the message was a phone number with a Montana area code. Wynn read the email 3 times. Keene's retirement was not surprising. The man had been close to eligibility, had logged enough years for a full pension. But the timing felt abrupt. The medical justification too convenient. Cardiac events were common enough in the service. But Keene had been in excellent health, had passed every physical without issue. The note about Morcant was more puzzling. Why would he be asking about incident reports 2 years after leaving the service? The official record contained nothing of substance, nothing that would explain what they had experienced. Unless Morcant was searching for confirmation, for documentation of something that existed only in the negative space between what was reported and what was true. Wynne saved the email and did not respond. He did not call the Montana number. He returned to work and processed the next file in the queue. But the email lingered. That evening, sitting in his small apartment with the windows closed against the sound of traffic, Wynne found himself reading it again. The phrasing was neutral, factual, but beneath it was an implication he could not ignore. Keene had retired. Morcant was looking backward. And Wynne was sitting in an office 200 miles from the last dive site, pretending the ocean had not marked him. He opened his laptop and searched for information on cardiac events in Navy personnel. The data was routine, statistical, unremarkable. He refined the search. Cardiac events following deep-water diving operations. The results narrowed but remained within expected parameters. He added another term: unexplained orientation loss. The search returned nothing. He tried different combinations: vestibular dysfunction, directional disorientation, sensory anomalies in divers. The results were academic papers on nitrogen narcosis, decompression sickness, inner ear barotrauma. Nothing matched what he and Morcant had experienced. Nothing came close. Wynne closed the laptop. The absence of documentation was not surprising. What they had felt did not fit into medical categories, did not align with known pathologies. It existed outside the framework of explainable phenomena, and therefore it did not exist at all. Except it did. And Morcant was looking for proof. 3 days later, Wynne called the Montana number. The phone rang 4 times before connecting. "Yeah." Morcant's voice unchanged. "It's Wynne." A pause. "Didn't think you'd call." "Keene forwarded your inquiry." "Figured he might." "Why are you looking at incident reports?" "Because I want to know if it happened to anyone else." Wynne leaned back in his chair. "And?" "Nothing official. But I found 3 other divers who transferred out of deep water ops within 6 months of each other. Same region, same dive sites. No medical disqualifications, no disciplinary issues, just voluntary transfers to shore duty. That's not unusual. It is when all 3 had perfect dive records and less than 5 years until retirement. Wynne said nothing. "You felt it again," Morcant continued. "After I left. That's why you transferred." "Yes." "Did it ask you?" The question landed with precision. Wynne closed his eyes. "Yes." "What did you say?" "Nothing." "Then you lost it." "Yes." Morcant exhaled slowly. "Same as me." "What are you looking for, Morcant?" "There's no documentation. No one's going to file a report about something they can't explain." "I know. But I need to understand what it was." "Why?" "Because it's still there." Wynne opened his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I moved to Montana, as far from the ocean as I could get. Landlocked, high altitude, no major bodies of water within 200 miles. Morcant's voice remained calm, but something beneath it had shifted. "It doesn't matter. I still feel it sometimes. Not as a pull, as an absence. Like something's missing that I can't name. That's just adjustment. You spent years diving. Your body's recalibrating." "It's been 2 years, Wynne. How long does recalibration take?" Wynne did not answer. "I think it marked us," Morcant said quietly. "I think it asked if we belonged." And when we didn't answer, it took something permanent. Not our ability to dive, our ability to know where we are. That's not possible. Neither was the pull, neither was the question. But they happened. Wynne stared at the wall of his apartment, at the generic paint and the absence of anything personal. What do you want from me? I want to know if you think I'm right. Does it matter? Yes. Wynne was silent for a long moment. He thought about the dive 2 months ago, the moment at 9 meters when the pull had withdrawn and left him disoriented despite perfect instrumentation. He thought about standing in the shallows at the beach, searching for a sense of orientation that no longer existed. He thought about Keen's sudden retirement and the 3 divers who had transferred without explanation. I think you're right, Wynne said finally. Then what do we do? Nothing? There's nothing to do. That's not good enough. It's the only option we have. We can't explain it. We can't document it. We can't prove it happened. All we can do is live with it. I didn't call you for resignation, Wynne. Then what did you call me for? To see if you were willing to go back. Wynne felt his chest tighten. Go back where? To the dive site. To find out what it was. That's insane. Maybe. But I need to know. And I think you do too. I'm grounded. Medical won't clear me. I'm not talking about official channels. I'm talking about going back on our own. Civilian dive. No Navy oversight, no protocols, no restrictions. That's illegal. Only if we get caught. Wynne stood and moved to the window. The street below was quiet, ordinary, removed from any context that would make Morcant's suggestion reasonable. Why would you want to do this? Because I can't move forward until I understand what happened. I left the service, left the coast, left everything connected to diving. And it didn't matter. The absence followed me. Morcant paused. I need to know if it's reversible. If there's a way to answer the question we didn't answer. And if there isn't, then at least I'll know. Wynne watched a car pass below, its headlights cutting through the dim evening. The idea was irrational, dangerous, potentially career-ending. It was also the only thing that had felt remotely purposeful in months. I'll think about it, Wynne said. Don't think too long. I'm planning to go in September, with or without you. Where are you getting the equipment? I have contacts, civilian operators who don't ask questions. And the site access? Same way we accessed it before. Boat charter, declared recreational dive, standard waivers. No one checks depth limits unless there's an incident. Wynne shook his head. This is a mistake. Probably. But I'm doing it anyway. The line went silent. Wynne waited. But Morcant did not add anything further. After a moment, the call disconnected. Wynne stood at the window for another hour, watching the street empty as night settled. The conversation had opened something he had spent months trying to seal. The possibility that what had been taken could be understood, if not reclaimed. The possibility that the ocean's question had an answer, if only they were willing to return and offer it. He knew the risks. He knew the regulations. He knew that what Morcant was proposing violated every principle of dive safety and operational protocol. He also knew he would go. The decision did not come as a revelation or moment of clarity. It simply settled into place, inevitable and final. He had been marked by something he did not understand, had lost something he could not name, and had spent months avoiding the only place where answers might exist. Morcant was right. Resignation was not enough. Wynne returned to his desk and opened his laptop. He drafted an email requesting leave. 2 weeks, starting in September, personal reasons. He sent it without hesitation. The approval came within an hour. He did not contact Morcant immediately. He spent the next 6 weeks preparing in silence, researching civilian dive operators along the northern coast, reviewing depth tables and decompression schedules, running calculations for dives that would never appear in any official log. In late August, he called the Montana number again. "I'm in," Wynne said. "Good." Morcant's response came without surprise, as if he had known all along. "I've secured equipment and a charter for the first week of September. Meet me in Brookings on the 3rd. "Understood." "Wynne, yeah. Whatever we find down there, we see it through. No surfacing early, no aborting because it gets uncomfortable. Agreed?" "Agreed." The call ended. Wynne sat in the silence of his apartment and felt something shift. Not hope, not anticipation, but a sense of trajectory that had been absent since his last dive. He was returning to the water that had asked him a question he had failed to answer. He was returning to find out if the ocean remembered, and if it did, what it would take in exchange for what it had already claimed.